Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as...
Everyone knows Dan does and competes martial arts. It's much more acceptable if they look over and they see Dan throwing punches, it's just the weird martial arts guy. And that's a much easier label to wear than being the Tourette's guy.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey, everybody. Hey, sounds like my voice is back a little bit. We'll see how this goes. First thing I want to say, thanks to everyone who participated in the Tourette Virtual Gala, for which I tried my best to look alert as your MC, channeling my inner 1988 MTV Adam Curry, a fellow Touretteer who we kicked off this season with. The gala was awesome. I had a nervous blast, lots and lots and lots of people. Actually, so many that the site crashed for a few minutes. Lots of people tuned in online to take part in it, hear from celebrity speakers like Dylan McDermott, who flaunted his award from the Tourette Association, and Calista Flockhart, who sadly pointed out that it was Dylan and not her who got the award, and watch performances, listen to me call out Michael Wolff and try to get him on the podcast, because I would love to talk to him. And of course, your ability to contribute to the Tourette cause with the Tourette Association of America, the sponsor of this podcast. Also want to give a shout out to David at Digital Waterworks. He's the guy who did the production for the gala. It was fun hanging out with him and nerding out over audio gear and shop talk. David, I'm definitely going to keep in touch with you. I'm grateful they included me, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. The Tourette Virtual Gala 2020, thank you, and there's more ahead. Really love being a part of the TAA. By the way, the part with Will and his mom, Tanya, that part really hit me. About being Black and having Tourette. She pointed out, Tanya, Will's mom, pointed out the time that, he was getting his learner's permit and learning to drive, and Tanya had to have a talk with Will about the chance that, he might get pulled over. And what are the cops going to think if he's ticking in a way that the cops maybe misinterpret as a threat or something unusual? She had to have a talk with him about that and actually make a plan. Like, talk about this and make a plan to get him through that in the event it was to happen. Really, really powerful, and just a reminder of the kind of worry that streams through communities that haven't really had a fair time in this world. Will and Tanya, if you're listening, we got to do an episode. It'll be an honor to share your story. The second thing I want to point out is you're going to hear me say many times in this episode the word alligator when I should have said crocodile. This is not going to matter to 95% of you, but there's a strong 5% to whom this will matter greatly. So every time you hear me say alligator, forgive me and think crocodile. All right, lots of great feedback about last week's episode with Jamie Grace. I knew she was going to be a hit. She's already a hit, but just really direct and funny and engaging. And she did not disappoint on the episode. I'm plugging again her new book, Finding Quiet, which covers territory we can all relate to. JamieGrace.com, and you can get a signed copy through that site. And lots of responses to the question we opened up last week from a listener named Aaron about when it's okay to laugh about Tourette Syndrome. You may recall this question. It pointed out that it's kind of a thorny issue. Some people say it's never okay to laugh about something that affects people so deeply, and others say it's really sad if you can't laugh about it from time to time. And my take was, you have to gauge what's right for you. Your preference doesn't set any rules for anyone else, or shouldn't, rather. If you want to have a laugh, your choice. But here's what you said. This is from Emily. As a parent of a son, 18 years old, with TS, I don't think we've ever had a good joke or laugh about it. We are not uptight people in the least. In fact, we love to joke and have fun. I think we figure that our son is safest at home with his tics and someplace he can release without judgment. Actually, I don't think my son is to a place yet where he can laugh at it. So maybe that's it. We are subconsciously following his lead. Jennifer said, our daughter promptly named herself Tickalicious and created a theme song featuring her favorite tics after diagnosis. When she had a flailing tic, she would often add a joking cha-cha-cha after it. We've always followed her lead and supported her jokes and fun, but have rarely participated in it. Becky, the dreadful barber, said, I don't mind if someone laughs with me when I do a funny tic, but not at me. There's a difference. The tics can be funny, but the other stuff, what comes with it, is definitely not. That I struggle with more than tics. I sometimes laugh at myself, not really feeling Tourette jokes that people make because mostly not funny and mostly not from people who actually live with TS. I'm also careful not to joke about it too much, as my TS is not as serious as some people's. Thanks, Becky. Shout out to Becky, by the way, who plays Tourette's podcast in her barbershop in Bournemouth, England. I absolutely love that. Thanks, Beck. It's always good to hear from you. And Rosemary said, I like to laugh and make comments about my tics. I don't like anyone else doing so. I don't mind them laughing at my comments. Just don't take it upon yourself to make fun of a Touretteer, unless you want to get punched. And one more from Hara, a Tourette's podcast alum, who said, tics are very personal, and like many, I would be so embarrassed if someone laughed. It was my friends who taught me to see the positives and allow myself to laugh. This was a game changer in how I viewed myself and how I dealt with harder times. Also, lots of my friends have their own somethings as well, and joking about them makes our experiences a lot easier to go through together. If you have that kind of close relationship, just adds pleasantry to experiences that can be tough at times, but then allows us to see the positives in them. Thanks, Hara. There are a lot more comments here. They're stacking up in the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, so you can head there to pile on and read what other people have said. But let's get to this week's conversation. Definitely a long one. With someone a contingent of the audience might actually really know. I've learned that we have a good number of martial artists in the audience and people who do MMA, which I think makes sense for Tourette and the energy expulsion we like to give from it and the discipline involved with it. Dan Tom is a writer for MMA Junkie, which is part of USA Today Sports. Dan is actually the second mixed martial arts journalist we've had on the podcast. You might recall Tim from season 1. That was a great episode. He's a writer for Bloody Elbow. That's another MMA publication. So this talk with Dan, I usually avoid the word epic because it's a little overused. Like, some people look at a bologna sandwich and they're like, epic, but they're wrong. This conversation is epic. It's a long one, and we're just opening up and getting deep, getting candid, getting vulnerable, getting heavy, getting philosophical. It's probably one of my favorite conversations because it covers so much, so candidly. Powerful backstory, some pain in here, but we talk about it the way we do, knowing a lot of you can relate. Truly epic episode, and remember, every time I say alligator, it's crocodile. Could you state your name and the general part of the world you live in, and then just what you do or how you would introduce yourself to this audience?
My name is Daniel Tom, full name. Dan Tom is kind of what you'll see as far as bylines and public profiles go. Don't mind saying that I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, the desert, here in the Western hemisphere of the United States. And I am I guess you would say, a fight analyst and writer. I write, analyze, talk about, break down in various forms, people fist fighting in cage fights, mixed martial arts, or as many people are more popularized with the main brand I cover, which is the UFC, also based here in Las Vegas.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I've had this maybe starting about 2 or 3 years ago. I definitely went through the whole thing, and I'm sure you've heard this before, of like kind of being an outsider to MMA, and I think having the generic opinion that, oh, this is just barbaric, and like, why is this allowed? And then actually spending time watching it, listening to interviews with mixed martial artists, and just kind of hearing about, in context, why they do what they do. Some people come from really difficult parts of the world where this is their ticket, to take care of their family, or it became kind of like a humanized interest for me. And I understand that you know Tim, who we talked with in season 1, who also does MMA writing. I guess what's your interest in that? Is there anything I said right then that's kind of part of your story, or how did you get into MMA as a interest point?
Yeah, that's a great question because nothing's ever full circle, much less what we're talking about with Tourette's. But not only does my Tourette's story, kind of come full circle, and I came to this podcast through Tim, who you had on season 1. I'm late to the party. I'm still, I sprinkled through and I listened to like key episodes that I jumped out at me, and then the completist in me jumped over. And now I'm plowing through season by season now on season 3. But yes, Tim from season 1 introduced me to this fantastic program and kind of opened me up to it. And as far as opening up to the realm where me and Tim work, which is cage fighting, Tim does fantastic work as well over there at Bloody Elbow. He does written pieces on does some photography galleries that have historical range. Really love Tim's work. But so we all come to it through different reasons. Mine was by accident, albeit not really. I'm a lifelong martial artist, which this all kind of ties into the Tourette's. It's a great thing about being a Tourette's podcast. There's always a segue, not too far, right, Ben? But
that's right.
but martial arts and like toward the end of season 2, I believe the gentleman was Nico. And I think he lives here in Las Vegas, but
he does, yeah.
I'm actually surprised. I didn't hear anybody until him speak of martial arts, because I just feel like it's a fantastic outlet. It's something I've always recommended family members, people in general. I've taught different martial arts growing up through different portions of my life, and really enjoyed working with children. Probably because, as I'm sure we'll talk about here, my upbringing was not ideal academically or outside of it. So not only did I do martial arts, which I don't think I realized, and I don't even know how much my parents realized, but it did help alleviate the Tourette's symptoms, which were really, really normal, but also, I guess, to I dare say in a bad range, much worse, obviously, when I was younger. But I found, like, oftentimes the pro basketball players or the pro fighters, they're great, they're talented, but Ben or listeners, maybe they can relate to this. If you have these people teach, it's not necessarily the best result. Some of the best teachers, in other words, aren't necessarily the best at their craft. Teaching in its own right is its own kind of skill.
Right.
And I found, again, not being an athletic kid, I found that I was better at the teaching side and explaining side of things. So fast forwarding and jumping ahead a bunch, I was preparing for my second amateur fight. The first one didn't go great. I wasn't in a great position. I didn't put myself in a great position to win, and I just got pretty much beat up for 3 rounds, and can hang my hat and say that I didn't get finished. But competing in almost every other realm of martial art and being able to get a win of it, whether it was jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing, etc., even albeit on amateur levels, folks, nothing crazy. It really bothered me, and that I didn't. This was the one monkey off my back. I was about to turn 30, and I think that's like a midlife crisis age for guys, I dare say. At 30, like, it really hits you, whether you're doing what you're supposed to or not. I think we all deal with it in different ways, of course. And mine was, okay, I gotta get a fight. And luckily there was a fight on my birthday, and the matchmaker through the promotion was somebody I actually worked with in the past through a grappling team, a submission wrestling team, for those that don't follow the terminology. And so he was a friend of mine, and he was like, I can get you a fight on your birthday. And I was training for it. And I ended up getting a really bad concussion. I probably have had them all my life, right? But this one, because of that, was really bad. And head trauma, this is where head trauma ties into answering your question and how I got into my career. But it also compounds uniquely with Tourette's, particularly the high energy, as far as a general theme. Everyone's Tourette's is different, of course. Everybody listening to this podcast, I'm sure, hopefully, is familiar with that. But yes, there's a general force driving us all. And when I had the head trauma, not only could I not do things like drive for certain amounts of time, I now wear glasses since then, not to be a hipster or look cool. I always tell my audience, and we know it's because of head trauma. The really bad cases, you can lose vision or worse, right? That's what happened to me. And not playing a violin, folks, by the way. There's a happy side to this story. But yeah, it was very bad. I experienced discrimination at a corporate job I had, which we could talk about as well, which was another kind of fear, and why I was afraid to wait till now to even come out with something like Tourette's, when things like head trauma, which are still being figured out by science and still being accepted socially. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but let's just say I felt a lot of those things, from fighting just to have insurance and so forth. And I'm not a perfect person, folks, but I was like exemplary worker, never missed a day. They promoted me to handling, it was for let's just say a very prominent health food grocery store. And I was handling their money and their deposits for that store. So very important job. but the head trauma made screen work and doing that important job difficult. And I think people were very hurt by that and were kind of reacted selfishly. People you thought were your friends, if anything, were just nothing but a good coworker too. And really just seeing people turn as far as that discrimination. And I don't want to get hung up. It was a very ugly story that does contribute to this story.
Hmm.
But luckily for me, even though I found myself having, and by the way, not only was I paid for insurance, but because I was competing at this time, I actually paid for extra insurance, thinking, what if I break my arm in competition? Like these were more realistic outcomes. I was trying to do the responsible thing again, just toe the line, good worker, pay for the extra insurance. But I also kind of was enlightened to the kind of, cruelty of insurance companies to deny coverage, especially
Hmm.
in something so muddy like head trauma. And I learned in these more muddier things like the head trauma or, gosh forbid, Tourette's or neurological disorders, the understanding was at a very low point in the room, no matter what professional, what appointed person you were rightly talking to even. And not getting hung up on this, the good news and the positive spin was um, I started a blog on the side. A friend did web design and was trying to build his own portfolio. He had a cushy corporate job with a company that does really well, selling shoes, we'll just say. And he wanted to build his portfolio on the side. And on my 30th birthday, where I should be fighting, if we're following the story, I'm kind of sad, even though lucky enough to have a girlfriend at the time who was lucky enough to gather some friends around for a surprise birthday party, if you will. And that's very rare for me in my history, by the way, these type of events. So I'm very, very great, very grateful for these events. And we're sitting around, and he says, "I'll help you build this website to start breaking down fights," because a coach of mine who's very popular, he sadly passed, Robert Follis. He's a very notable name in the mixed martial arts community. Him, amongst other coaches, could kind of see that I was, there's a reason why they would have me, sub in for their classes and run their classes at a very prominent mixed martial arts gym here, Extreme Couture, for a reason. It wasn't because I was talented, Ben. It was
Hmm.
because I was back to that previous point. I was much better at teaching than doing. And in that sense, since I couldn't be on the mat and I was going crazy, like most people who, I interview athletes as a part of my job, not a big part, but I'm lucky enough to work on Sirius XM for some years. And we interviewed a slew of athletes, and listening to the quote unquote biggest, strongest people in the world, these big cage fighters, right? Men and women, just right, superior beings for all our knowing,
Hmm.
dealing with all these base level things that have come with Tourette's that I'm sure you, Ben, and your listeners have dealt with,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I've definitely heard interviews like that. I'll just listen out of curiosity, even though I don't, have much, direct knowledge of that world. But you do hear a lot of those same themes. Some of them come from, backgrounds of being bullied, or, having like a difficult family background, or just something that is a personal challenge that kind of feeds into it. And what you were saying about the energy piece of it, I've had a couple other people actually since who do martial arts, including a young man named Bryson. They all had similar things to say about, I think, kind of the expression, just the kinetics of doing something like that. But there's also a thinking that comes with it too, and you get in this zone. And I've I guess come to know jujitsu as being kind of like chess. Kind of anticipating what's coming, and what you can do to kind of counter it. And there's just something about that, just the expression that just comes out of you while you're also, very focused thinking. And there's just something that kind of abstractly ties in with all of this, and how the Tourettic brain kind of works, and just a huge fascination point for me.
no, you're spot on with that, and that's awesome. It sounds like you get some interest in jujitsu yourself, Ben. I'm going to poke and prod you throughout this podcast about that, by the way. But no, you're very spot on about that. It is, one of those things where even, just on a human level, on a basic level, you quote unquote normal people will say it's great. You don't think about your dishes, you don't think about your bills, you don't think
Mhm.
about work. You're trying not to get choked out. And I'm going to
Right.
go do jujitsu after this. I'm terrified because my schedule got away from me. And not only have I not been for about a week and a half, but I haven't like done this simple things like working out at home in the interim. And you're nervous, you're probably gonna
Mhm.
get a little hurt, and there's a possibility you can get hurt. I've gotten injuries from it before, but as the great Rodney Mullen, a skater who I always
Oh man, yeah.
really loved.
Hero.
Yeah, right. And I'm even more, if you hear him speak lately, this guy's talk about an inspirational speaker, but similar to what he puts with skating and falling down, it's like that's love. There's pain in there. There's a little hate in there sometimes. And there's all these emotions, sure, but back to your initial, not your observation, but yours personally, but you put it out there beautifully as far as a general observation that's probably common. Oh, it's just macho or this. And no, there's a lot of layers. And I apologize if I'm jumping around, folks, but back to what I was originally saying, as far as when that is taken away from you, that tool, it's detrimental to someone with Tourette. Sure, I can tell you that firsthand. And it's not comforting is the wrong word. I don't take joy in it by any means, but there is something good in knowing that everybody that can relate to having some type of outlet taken away. But to replace that was, I guess, answering your first question, which I ran off with, was working in the media space, covering things from this side of the fence, not being in there. I was never going to make a career like my different coaches. Shout out to Neil Melanson, sat me down and said, "What do you want to do? You're a smart kid. What do you want to do, man?" And I remember it almost brought me to tears, this conversation. It hit me out of nowhere, and he did it because he genuinely cared. And he was one of the guys who also helped push me toward, maybe writing and breaking down fights. And I used that site that I told you all about a couple minutes ago. Ended up putting my work on there, got picked up by an outlet over in the UK, started working for them, got picked up by an outlet who's still here in Texas, Flow Combat, started working for them, and then eventually made the jump to MMA Junkie, which is a USA Today Sports property, one of their main and best doing business ones, mind you, especially this day and age. And made it over there, which was kind of ironic because when I first got board, that was my homepage to know what was going on. So to see them get absorbed by USA Today Sports was huge. It felt like a win, even though I had no connection. And then you fast forward 10 years on this site, which means therefore USA Today Sports is first fight analysts. And as we can talk about the beginning of my story, if you want to know, as far as the Tourette's and stuff, just coming from not just where I came from, which we can all, a lot of us listening to your podcast can relate to, but you can't help but think of all the people from family, friends, teachers. That's something I related to an Australian fellow you had on the podcast. He said the teachers were the real bullies, man.
Right.
And even though I have stories of kids, I feel like I relate to him more with that teacher angle. So but yeah, that just long answer. It encapsulated a lot for how I got to working here. But yeah, man.
Wow. A lot of what you said, definitely kind of swims in and out of things I feel like I've experienced. And, growing up and having the challenges of, the comment about teachers too. I mean, there are some great ones out there, but there are also ones who, they have decisive authority over you and you kind of have to sell them on where you're at. And if they're not on board with it, that can be really bad for you, just in terms of having that feeling of victory and feeling like you won't be embarrassed in class. You feel like you're comfortable. You feel like the person who's trying to teach you has an understanding of where you're coming from. And, that's huge. And it is definitely not the fortunate case for everybody. I guess with me, it was always, school was just something I was terrible at. Music and art and things like that. That's where I could, kind of express myself and really hyper-focus and take a break from any thoughts of my problems. And if I was thinking about my problems, that was directly influencing what my output was, what the music was, what the art was, and all of that. And eventually, I got into journalism. I was a journalist for about 13 years for newspapers. And, so we kind of have a parallel a little bit right there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's fun because that's something where I could hyper-focus. There were times, when I was writing on deadline where I would just be, just ticking my teeth out basically, but in a way where I still felt focused and I still felt like I had my purpose. This is something I'm good at and people are going to appreciate it. And it's awesome that you were able to kind of steer all of this into something where, you're the first of your kind, at least where you're employed. I mean, it's not like you were able to call your shots the whole way, but you landed where you landed because of your unique talents. And that I think is a really great takeaway for anybody who has sort of doubts about their future with TS. I get emails from parents a lot about, the what are the challenges my son or daughter is going to face. And it's really important to hear these perspectives. And you referring to that as a long answer, I thought it was perfect because it really kind of took me through stuff I could personally relate to. And I feel like everybody else can too, even if the subject matter is a little bit different. It's very analogous to where a lot of us are.
That's fantastic, man. I appreciate that. And yeah, to peel back the curtain slightly in the beginning of this, before we started going, you asked if there was any questions I had for you. And I jokingly, not jokingly, but, humorously said, I've got a ton of questions for you. And I feel selfish because I'm in your house and you're interviewing me, but I'm like, man, there's so many questions like I want to ask you, Ben. And
man, we're just talking. So anything you want.
And since you bring it up, but yeah, that was something that I've always really identified through listening to your podcast is the whole deadline aspect, because that's something that I'm sure I hinted off air and both on air actually in your episode about a troublesome childhood and stuff, and those things certainly inflated the Tourette's. And, you think, you read, you get older, and like you highlight on this show, a lot of literature is highlighted toward children. And a lot of literature says, you grow out of it, you settle, you accommodate, or you should, is kind of the unwritten suggestion there. And a lot of the things you read. And it's very difficult to gauge. And especially with my attitude of wanting to separate from it, probably around the same time as you've said it to your listeners and when you started separating. And I didn't have that Tourette's I forget what they call it, the association that you were initially introduced to as a child.
Yeah. So they were the Tourette Syndrome Association way back when. They're the Tourette Association of America.
Okay. Yeah. And they were around, don't get me wrong. I'm younger than you, I believe, at 35. So it's not like they weren't around, but we weren't aware. It was a long process, but to get the diagnosis and a fight in that own right, which was kind of funny because I was actually, before this podcast, my mother showed me the papers today, like the official diagnosis papers and write-ups. And I'll definitely cite some things here as they become relevant, but it was eye-opening reading actual scientific, because it was over the course of years and all these different studies. And like they measured everything from my tensile strength from left to right. It was pretty insane. I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize for getting sidetracked here, but back to the Tourette's and where we parallel and relate as far as the deadlines. But anyways, I pushed away about the same time as you, Ben. But you think that whether you voluntarily push away, things maybe they do get better, right? Right. And as I'm sure I'll talk about here, as far as tics, which I'm always careful not to get too in depth. Again, I don't take joy in this, but one of the most enlightening things to find out was it wasn't just me who believed, like, not even just Tourette tics. Like if someone had a habit, I would literally go, and when I was a kid, I'd cover my ears, go, la, 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 I can't hear the habit, because I knew that once I heard the habit, I would be like some messed up X-Men and have to start doing it. And that was my new move for the week. So that was one of the more relieving things. Sorry to get sidetracked and make that note.
No. I totally relate.
But as I get to this kind of a job, even though I'm not a journalist, I work in that field. The news cycle never stops, especially in mixed martial arts. It's actually, people will tell you from actual like beat writers from more established sports, no, MMA is the craziest with the athletes, the accessibility that we have, where our sport is. And in this pandemic era, not to timestamp the episode too harshly, but we have been the most actively running sport. So it can become dangerous as far as burnout, overclocking your system. And I've actually discovered that a lot of my Tourette's, even perhaps the more coprolalia based ones that I thought maybe went away as a kid, still linger around.
Yeah.
And I don't, again, I'm sure you might have had guests on in these last 3 seasons that I haven't heard yet that have had similar experiences. The range is amazing that you've been able to pull on. Great job on that, by the way. But
appreciate that.
But that's also been a part of the reason of me wanting to come full circle. From a selfish perspective, I want to understand things, from whether it's the Tourette's itself or things that I'm not trying to, nor would I ever blame the Tourette's for or dare give it that much credit for. But, basic human things. I may be excelling in other areas, but kind of like the CBS journalist you had on the end of season 2.
Oh, David Begnaud.
Yeah, it was an amazing interview, by the way. But like he said, the road wasn't painted in roses and rainbows. There's a lot of pain to get here.
Yeah.
But also, also B, it's like, remember, we're about the same age. You remember Peter Pan? There is Hook with Robin Williams.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, and they have the shadow play too. But I grew up with, remember every friend's house, and maybe your house had it too, Ben. You had the library of Disney books, right? It was those and Disney VHSs, folks. They were like giant books. And this is kids these days like, what, VHS? Stay with us, folks. Stay with us here. And in that version of Peter Pan, as well as the Hook one, he chases his shadow, and and that was his thing. That was his partner. And now in Hook, where you have Robin Williams as Peter Pan, folks, I know I'm giving you guys a little Disney lore here, sidetrack, but he is now older, and he has to now remember what it is like to be the Pan. And the trick was, he didn't have to go very far. He didn't even have to go to Neverland. It was right under his nose the whole time. His shadow was right there. And that's what I feel like with Tourette's, especially as I get older. Yeah. And like I said, when you thought you've escaped it, you're starting to do socially acceptable things. You should be past it, right? And sorry, Hans, wrong guess, to quote Die Hard. And and again, to reference Peter Pan, that shadow is still with me, and it's like I'm rediscovering it all over again, Ben.
It's such a good way to put it. I'd never thought of it that way. There's that discussion of like, do we have, this is kind of a deep, way off topic philosophical conversation about, do we really have free will, or are we eternally guided by kind of almost predeterminations to where there are things that we have, the way we were born, who we were born with, where we were born, just things that really kind of take a lot of sort of quote unquote free will decisions off the map for us. And our future is really kind of determined in a way to where, it's different from fate. It's more just, there's something here that's going to stick with you and is going to make decisions for you in a way. And when you think you've gotten away from it, it comes right back to you. And that can be a good thing. It could be a bad thing, but it kind of is what it is. And I am where I am right now, largely because I feel like I've just kind of landed here. And even intentional decisions like starting the podcast, it's something that had been on my mind for, like a good while before I did it. I didn't really think, seriously that it would just, find any audience, or I would have more than 5 episodes or anything like that. But it just kind of takes off and does its own thing. TS being something that was something I really fiercely tried to just stuff down and get away from and hide from. Like that's the other thing too, like the alligator or whatever that kind of goes after Captain Hook. And it's just sort of this like fateful thing where it's, you're going to rendezvous again. TS is something that I think almost adds an extra level of, this is what I've got and these are my options, not necessarily limited, but definitely styled in a certain way to where I'm going to come out a certain way, and it could be really good, maybe depending on perspective, maybe depending on the work I put into it, but the TS is always going to be a part of it. Even if my tics go away, it's Amanda Talty, the president of the Tourette Association. She was on a while back saying, you don't run into people saying, I used to have TS. It's still a life experience for you. You land where you land, and the TS kind of makes some decisions for you. Again, it doesn't have to be bad. It can be a good thing. It's something I found to be true for myself anyway. I don't get away from it. It's something that's on my mind all the time, whether I'm self-conscious about it or whether I'm proud of it. And it's helping me in my expressions and who I'm meeting and who I'm talking to, or this conversation we're having today, which I'm really enjoying. A lot of it just kind of comes back to that. All the bad experiences that I've had have really kind of set my brain to, kind of want to have a victory over it. Not necessarily like a win for pride, but just almost for practical sake. And how can I apply this negative experience from my life? And I think everybody can relate to that in a certain way, but how do I apply this negative experience from my life to some sort of practical use, whether it's how I express myself, what I do for a living? And I think the search for that is the daunting part that can really kind of get people down sometimes and add to the anxiety and depression and everything like that. And one thing I guess I've kind of learned for myself, especially in the past couple of years, is to kind of do my best to look over the fence and realize that there is something on the other side of the fence that maybe I just have to use my imagination to envision, but you can see over the fence and there's something there and it's different from where you are right now, even if you do have this struggle or whatever it is. And that's, I think, going right back to the mixed martial arts and jujitsu and all that, it's that whole thing is a struggle. It's not, like it's going to be easy. If you've got two experienced fighters, it's not going to be just some pacifist handshake. It's going to be, they're going to go at it. Something's going to happen. It could be, just like a wild hit, or it could be something that's very calculated or something. But I could talk into outer space if I wanted to, and that's how my brain goes. But this is just, that's what it feels like, and that's why I relate to the MMA stuff, because it just feels so metaphorical to what we go through, if that makes sense.
It sounds like it relates perfectly. Ben, you got to give yourself more credit. For one, you're making a Disney analogy sandwich here that I'm about to even build on further for your audience. So, like, what did we tune in for? I'm just kidding, folks. No, you guys are in great hands, because not only can Ben pull that out, he then goes into, I'm sure you sounds like heady talk in your head, the way you're kind of semi-jokingly self-criticizing yourself, but you're actually making a ton of sense, Ben, and you're making me think about jujitsu. Before I can say that, you tie it right into jujitsu, because that is my favorite part of jujitsu, Ben. It's never been any of the submissions. I get beat up. First of all, folks, I think I'm technically a blue belt in the gi, purple belt in catch wrestling, 2 black belts one in taekwondo, one in kempo karate. All any of that means is I've been beat up more than the average human being. People say, Dan, how do I become a fight analyst? Oh, go to your local college and take Fight Analyst 101. It doesn't exist. I can't tell you the path. I can tell you my path, which involved, back to what I just said, getting beat up a lot. So, don't get it twisted, folks. I'm not usually getting a lot of submissions in the first place, but even when I do, that's not what I value, Ben. What I value when I go home and I replay the roll session, which is a sparring session where you're trying to go and choke or put someone in an armor joint lock for the uninformed, and you go home after practice that day, my most rewarding thought, Ben, is when I'm in a really bad spot, whether it's a good person who should have me in that bad spot or not. I'm just in a really bad spot, and I was able to reverse it. It doesn't even have to be a fancy technical sweep. Maybe it was something I just held strong. I waited for the right time. Once I felt the weight displace, I pushed off and I exploded at the right time, the right moment, the right direction. Doesn't matter how I got there. I reversed position. And that is so rewarding to me. And it's always been that way. And I've never put it together like this, but listening to you talk, give yourself more credit. You just put it together for me, sir. And that is Tourette's, because you're never going to get Tourette's at the chokehold. You're never going to get it to tap. You cannot wire yourself that way. And obviously when we're young, that's obviously what we want to do. We want to, find, and we could talk about that, medication or non-medication, and that's everybody's own path for their own to research. But I would argue once you kind of get settled with it, in whichever way you settle with it, you learn that there's different approaches, there's different styles to fight, right? But you're not really going to get the Tourette's to tap. Which I've been realizing, right? And so I have to be rewarded, kind of like how I am rewarded with jujitsu. And in that same theme on what you said with Hook, I don't know if you made that with the alligator, but as time goes on, even when Hook did his battle with the alligator and he has the alligator mounted in the middle of town square, by the time Dustin Hoffman is now playing Hook, right? The early 90s folks following our pre-conversation there. And Hook's a pretty confident guy. He seems like he's moved on, but as soon as somebody brings in that tick tock, it's like a PTSD. It's a trigger, and you see it deeply embedded in it. Spoiler alert, folks, it gets the best of him, and I'll leave it at that. And I don't know if that's the connection you made, but it's a quite brilliant one, because that's, not, I hope that doesn't come off as a negative, folks. But yes, that the Tourette's is still there. And perhaps I'm Hook in that analogy, right? Because I thought, But I was well past it, I'm not, by the way, I'm not, it's a very low paying field, folks. I'm not rich by any means, but maybe my coat's a little bit nicer. I'm thinking I'm hitting my stride. Right. And no, it's, hey man, I still got to deal with those same things. And we all do,
Yeah. And that's the bottom line. We all do. And it's, you had mentioned, it's hard to get the Tourette into the submission hold, and, you're not going to get it to tap out there. There's medication, there's comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics or CBIT, where, you're kind of pulling these fake out moves on your tics. It's non-pharmaceutical. It's more of a, cognitive kind of brain exercise. And it takes a lot of training, and you can get better at it. It's still not a cure. Your tics may go away with time, but, or they may alleviate, or, they may indeed, leave you when you're, 14 or 15 years old. But that stuff, if it sticks through the formative years, then, that's the adult you're going to become. You're going to have all kinds of memories of that, of how that shaped you. And I kind of, not to be filled with, feel good nonsense or anything like that. I that's why I've kind of done this about face with my TS. And when I say I am, proud of it, it's not just to kind of like project and get other people to be, falsely proud of something that's been a challenge for them. Because I totally understand when people say, I want to get rid of my TS. It's a pain. It causes me physical pain. I want to live my life differently, and I'm totally on board with that too. But I think just the concept of having it, and going back to what you said, we all have, kind of something to deal with. It's the challenge that's always in front of me, and it's always kind of keeping me on my toes. And it is kind of perspective, I guess, from that point, because, it could be something I'm really embarrassed about. I can feel awkward about it. I still do. I haven't conquered that part of it either. If my boss is around, or somebody who's, kind of really, quote unquote important, I don't want my first impression, to be something that's kind of disenfranchising or writing myself off as someone who's, going to be socially viable. But having these tics and getting my brain to kind of think of them as something I can maybe work with, and if I can't, how do I steer it into something that has some kind of promise for me? That's why I've come to kind of, like is a weird word, but that's why I've kind of come to appreciate, I guess, my Tourette. And that's something I do want to tell a lot of parents, who have young, children who've been diagnosed, and the future seems uncertain. It's going to be a stressor, and it will be, but the same thing for a lot of other people who have different diagnoses or nothing at all. There's always something that's going to be, kind of in front of you that gets you to think differently of, how am I going to get around this object, or how am I going to walk with it? And that's kind of where I am right now. I wasn't there a few years ago. I was still embarrassed by it. Now I'm totally cool talking with people about it. And I feel like that has been kind of like the submission win, in a way, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to be embarrassed about it anymore. I can have a conversation with my coworkers about it. And when you open up like that, people open up to you too, and they see the vulnerability and appreciate that. They'll come to you with their problems if they want advice, or, it's just kind of a door opener in some weird backward way.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to divulge too much, but just for reference, I did speak to you with just even going through the process, which I'm still going through, admittedly, kind of like you yourself were going through when you launched the podcast. But already, even in the small window, just getting responses of people being receptive or offering up things that you might find surprising, we'll just say. And I'm also, love that you brought up the parent reaction, because that was exactly my mother's today, because we both went down a trip down memory lane looking at these official papers, which I always thought I had my official diagnosis in 92, 93. But that's when we essentially started the tests and the fight. And essentially my mom and ADD is a part that I have to accept, been having to accept more as a reality for me, that part of it. And I've never downplayed it before, mind you. However, and neither did my mom or anything. That being said, this is the early 90s, folks, and everything was a quick solve of a Ritalin, diagnosis, and you're out the door. And my mom I
remember that.
Yep. Yeah. And that's essentially what my mom was fighting for. And to talk about that more, hopefully, before this episode ends, because she's a big part of my story now, as she's showing me these papers, and memories are kind of coming back to her, because she had about about 1 year to the day. My 2020, I always tell people, would have been craziest and crappiest year, like regardless of any of the stuff that's affecting everybody would have happened. In part because she discovered brain aneurysms in her head, and multiple ones, and that ranked very high on their proverbial Richter scale. And it was essentially an action movie of failed procedures, as far as the lesser invasive ones that were like scheduled conveniently on Christmas, and the other one was like on Thanksgiving, which aren't great times for my family anyways, because of our holiday history. But yeah, and just dealing with that and all this stuff. And she finally gets the operation done in March, and they have to go cranial, which is troublesome, right? And they get them all, though, thankfully. But she stroked out because of it, and she's actually doing really good. You know, she's doing really well, all things considered. Like, she sounds great. Her memories are there. We couldn't ask for more. If she didn't get, she's still in the window to improve. But we say if she didn't get any better, we're effing grateful. You know, we're grateful.
Totally.
And it's been a full circle, because now, and I'll leave kind of the family. So I do hope some of my family that are curious maybe listen to this episode, because there's, you know, a lot of deep-seated histories and even doubts, which, you know, sadly is not common. Now, my story's not special. A lot of closest family members to professionals doubting what you're dealing with is quote unquote real. I mean, I saw it even with head trauma, which is why I always laugh at the people who thought I was using it as an excuse to get out of work, when I found a much better job and I still deal with all the stuff that people said I was lying about. And so the Tourette's thing, like, yeah, I totally understand. I've experienced on both fronts, right? So, you know, she was obviously, my mother was my biggest fighter, and my only fighters, the only person fighting for me. So when she went under in this procedure, she was in a vulnerable state, and without, you know, incriminating, getting too into it, but you know, you really see who your friends are, even within your own family, when things happen, we'll just say. And I really had, let's just, long story short, I really had to step up for my mom, made sure she got the therapy she was getting while this COVID stuff, not to timestamp your episode, was kind of taking over, trying to, you know, it was like 28 days later for her. She goes in, there's no such thing as COVID on her radar, right? And she comes out and everybody's on masks. There's all these things, like, you know.
Wow.
So it's, you know, it's like a drama movie with a little bit of A&E and a little bit of Lifetime, which I'll spare you, but we'll just leave it at that. And I was put in a position where I had to defend and advocate for her. And so you've got not just the Tourette's parallels, but also, you know, I'm not old, but I'm older at 35, but I still think that I'm young for the experience of, you know, having to, you know, and without getting into detail, but, you know, your parent, when someone goes through that series of procedures, they have to relearn everything: speaking, bathroom, everything. And having to prematurely do that role reversal of taking care of the parent, both in a literal sense, right? But then also that layered sense with the Tourette's, and seeing people come at, you know, because she looks fine on the outside now. The scar's gone away. Her hair's grown back. She can drive, thankfully, right? Like, she's doing amazing. Don't get me wrong, but things will stammer her, and she'll get stammered. And less from the Tourette's, more from the head trauma. Me and her relate so much. It brought us so much closer. And it's just this weird full circle we talk about now, how I'm protecting her, because she's a very strong lady, by the way. And this is a tough lady who looks out for everybody. You know, this is a very hard to be in that vulnerable of a state, that head trauma, which I can also speak to. Depending on your variance, hers was worse than mine, obviously, but still, it can be crippling. And so it's another reason, kind of long-winded here, apologies, but another reason why this whole thing has been full circle for me. It's made me look back into my past to understand and be more grateful, right, for all the battles that she went to battle for me, looking back. And, you know, like, I mean, and even like as nearly as, like, I was moving into the house that I'm moving in now a couple of years ago. I've got the job with the USA Today. I should be at a quote unquote, finally a socially acceptable place for my family members, who kind of all put their noses in the air toward me. And we're kind of the black sheep of the family over here. And I remember my mother going into, and this is probably going to out for any family listening. I apologize. I still love all my family members, even the ones that don't have nice things to say. So I'm not trying to out anybody here, but one of my aunt's place of business sells furniture, and she was buying me it's like some cheap couch for my place. And for what it's worth, I have like a career, which is also what upsets me because I have this crazy guilt thing where my mom has done so much for me. I'm like, I always get upset with her if she spends anything on me. And so I'm not like
Yeah.
wired that way in the first place, right? And I'm doing well, and it's a freaking couch.
But by the way, I relate to that. Just to kind of put a pin in that part, I really relate to the guilt part. Because I do feel like with my background, and especially being someone who's always, I guess, kind of had this frustration of feeling misunderstood.
Yes.
There've always been, like people in my family who have completely stuck by me and have bailed me out of so many things and problems and have guided me through things when they do anything else for me, especially if it's like a material thing that they've, put some kind of like financial effort into. I just like get like a stomach ache. I feel so guilty that I have this. I feel like I should just, kind of reverse and pay them back with everything I have. And, that's something that's always, I feel like that's daily on my mind of just, I'll look at things, objects, gifts that people have given me, and I just don't feel deserving. And it's because I feel like I've just been given so many immaterial things and help and all of that is just so much more valuable. I feel like I need to balance my checkbook, and that may be insignificant, but that's just something that really stuck out to me when you said that.
No, and not to further sidetrack, but you speak on a great point, Ben, and it ties into something you speak on and your guests speak on, frankly, a lot, which is the empathy angle, which I was starting to put together myself, and this only validated it listening to you speak with your guests on it. As far as one of the safer things to say on Tourette's is, it definitely generates a more empathetic person, which is also why accusations, whether it's from your family members or coworkers, that you would be doing something to take advantage of somebody hurt so much. Because if they only knew the truth, it couldn't be A, further from the truth, and B, it's further from the truth is because that person, like yourself, Ben, myself, or the people listening, not to compare straws, but I will use it in this case. I've been through more than the average Joe, I dare say. So to come to that conclusion and still be empathetic and then accuse was very hurtful. And she said to my mother, says, "When are you going to stop helping him?" And my mother just goes, because from family members to doctors even saying, "Oh, those aren't tics. You're just over mothering." And she just said, F you. You don't understand what he's had to deal with, the road he's had to walk. You don't get it. And the ironic part is that part of my family who, is my family, and even my parents entrusted, even with legal rights, a lot of them very nose up in the air. The more college educated side, nothing wrong with the college education, folks. I would have kept going to college if I didn't run out of money. Nothing wrong with it. But to judge people, especially when the irony and kind of comes full circle with me and my father, although I'm kind of Quentin Tarantino, giving you guys the end here. We're going by the end and working backwards. Quentin Tarantino mixed with Disney analogies, only here on the Tourette's podcast, folks. But, including my father, which was part of the reason why I stopped going to college, and let me preface this with me and my father, after not speaking for upwards of 13 years, have recently reconnected. So before anything I share, anything like, I'm not telling anybody how to feel. I'm sharing my story because it's my story, and I feel like it needs to be shared, but I'm not trying to incriminate's too strong of a word, but I'm not trying to, I'm definitely not mischaracterizing, but I'm not trying to over dramatize or, it's not about digging up dirt on anybody here, folks. This is for the story. So, my father as well. And these are people that preached, college education and living up to this standard, like quote unquote normal standards, right? In westernized American, modern day America. But the ironic part was none of those people, including my father, who went to school, and a really good school, by the way, for journalism, none of them ever worked anywhere close to what they went to school for. Yet they were holding that standard among their kids and their brothers and sisters' kids. So to come back and be successful, not just be successful, it was, and my dad's owned up to it. Like he's eaten his crow, you know what I'm saying? Like, and apologize for what it's worth, people. But, you know, having your own father not believe in you, take away money from school and pretty much in no more words or less say they don't really believe in you. And you go and not only do you succeed, but you succeed in the area that they were allowed to succeed in, that they had more privilege to succeed in. And if that's not poetic justice, like I don't know what is. And keep in mind, folks, my mother was a great fighter. My father, I don't think a lot of these people, by the way, they're not bad people. I truly believe that still to this day. I just don't believe my father was meant to be a father. And he was dealing with his own things. And it's funny when I went back to read this full report where they measure like everything from tensile strength to psycho eval. It was like over the course of like a 5-day study for this one, but this was also accumulated off prior tests over the course of years, folks. And I went through and read this, and they even picked up on the disturbances at home, you know, because without getting too far into it, it was from physical, psychological, verbal. There was abuse in the home, and I can only speak on my portion of the abuse in the home and how it relates to Tourette's. But then again, he didn't know what it was, and even when we started finding out, he wasn't as open to it, let's just say, as my mother was, right? And my mother was just, I mean, she was tasked. She had the impossible task that she still beats herself up unfairly to this day about, you know, on trying to police things in that house. And you know, there were things that I don't remember, like I was forced to eat over the sink because I couldn't sit still. My dad, who definitely has more of the OCD, depression, introverted, whereas his brother had a lot of the hyperactive ADD parts of Tourette's. So we're figuring it comes from that side. But he definitely had the clean OCD part. And unfortunately, I've got a lot of that too. Fortunately, try to express it much differently. But even things like I remember having my free arm that I wasn't eating with tied to the chair. He thought I had an issue with manners, not understanding not to put my elbows on the table. And, you know, it was a little more than that, right?
Wow.
And I'm not trying to trigger anybody with, because as bad as that sounds, and I don't want to trigger anybody with that, I'm sure there's people with worse stories, right? So I'm not trying to play up that angle, but just to give kind of context as far as coming full circle is.
Yeah.
And when it got too out of hand, and I think I referenced this briefly, but earlier in the program, but and yeah, when my mom couldn't protect me and my sister, there was a part where she filed for divorce, but I remember, I think we waited for him to take a trip, and we house hopped for a while, you know. We spent a lot of the holidays at different, spent this holiday at the Jewish family friend's house, spent this holiday at the Italian family friend's house, you know, and we got to learn their traditions, and it was great. And I thought we were just on some long sleepover. And I think after like week 2, I was like, why are we going home?
Right.
And that eventually settled, and we got an apartment, and things became, and the split was as amicable as you could ask, really, actually, all things considering after that. And coincidentally, after getting out of the house, how this relates to Tourette's, not trying to play a violin here, folks, but coincidentally, the Tourette's kind of contracted. But it's so crazy because, reading back on these papers and the diagnosis, right, the official diagnosis, it shows that like my grades and all these things started downtrending right around the same time, 91, 92, from the Tourette's. Now, if you ask my mother, she said she has mother's intuition. She always knew something was wrong. And the paperwork that I read was pretty revealing because it did state a lot of the stuff factual. Like I didn't talk till this age, like 2 years old, which I believe the average is 6 months, right? Like I could comprehend. I don't know if that's a common thing that you've got with people you've interviewed, or if that's something on Tourette's that I've misread, or not read up on, or is common. But I was very slow.
I hear it. Yeah.
Very slow, a lot of things. And, I use the analogy. I wasn't the greatest athlete or martial artist, so I was a good teacher. Like, I'm not saying that out of tongue or to put myself up in any way. And I'm not saying I wasn't a great athlete to be overly self-deprecating. Like, I literally read a report this morning of teachers, doctors, parents, like a bunch of pros and people that know me, right? All written down. This is not your words, right? I was the last picked on the team. How many times have we heard that? I literally read
Right.
today,
Yeah.
Ben, due to his abilities, he is always the last picked on the team. I'm like, geez.
Right.
So it's like bringing back these things and you're like, holy crap. And
That's definitely true for me. Yeah.
and I guess back to that point of why it hurts to hear people like with the head trauma, even to deny something like that should be even more provable and relatable than Tourette's if we're drawing straws here.
Right.
People deny that, much less people deny the Tourette's is very hurtful. Or I've had, from one of the things I score very low on, which I'm happy to hear. I feel like I'm in the minority. I feel like for the most part, people have done really well, which I'm happy to hear, by the way. It gives me hope, genuinely, that people, have friends, good friend circles and relationships, because I score by far, Ben, the lowest in those, as far as counting on one hand in each category. And that sounds crazy to people. You have X amount of friends online, or, I'm like, those aren't your real friends, right? On social media platforms.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I've always scored very low on. And, and again, I don't want to blame Tourette's or anything like that, but I do think of things like, again, that people deny along with Tourette's and head trauma, but depression is another one that I didn't realize until today how strong of a theme that's always been. I dabbled with medication as far as that goes. So it was, I knew that it was a part of the neurological umbrella that is Tourette's. But on this paper, it's funny. It said they think I had more anxiety as a kid than depression, but they took quotes from me, and I don't even remember this one, Ben. And this sounds strong to share. I can't shake it. I just read it this morning. So, you're getting pure emotion from me, folks. But it said, it said Daniel was a mild-mannered kid, really well-mannered. Because again, I was more the introverted. I wasn't too hyper or anything, So it says, very good manners, was polite, could comprehend, can speak very well. I speak to more adults than kids my age, which is something that I've heard other guests say, and maybe
Absolutely.
yourself.
Yeah.
And, but then it also said, I had a difficult time establishing rapport with whoever the professional psychologist interviewer. But that being said, I'm mild-mannered, this and that, answering the questions, being perfectly responsive, didn't deny access to anything, yet still distanced enough to say that I didn't have good rapport. But yet a couple sentences later, I'm quoted, and this could be anywhere from a 9 to 10-year-old boy, folks, saying, I feel alone, which I remember feeling as early as first grade. I feel stupid, which I don't, that doesn't surprise me. But this one didn't. It just said, I just want to die. And I'm like, how can a smart, level-headed kid just tell a stranger who he's not clearly not letting in, but he can still be dead serious and receptive enough to tell that person he wants to die?
Yeah.
And then it made me just flash back to all from family members, relationships, people who are, once called friends, just telling me to get over it, telling me, oh, it's in your head, or that's, pick your word, right? Pick your scenario. And I know I'm not the only one here. I'm not trying to play a violin, folks. Forgive me, because I know so many of you have your own versions of this story. But just to hear, I remember so much. My memory is crazy sharp, which is probably part of the reason why I do the work I do now. But I had no recollection of that, Ben. And I know you went through like an insane battery of tests too. And although I didn't my family didn't elect for medication, and it sounds like I had much less exposure to drugs than you. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, the memory, but are there things that you just totally blank out from that time period, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I relate in my own context. I relate to virtually all of that in one way or another. Being viewed as, polite, mild-mannered. I definitely had my period of being like a hellion, but it kind of follows the self-punishing, didn't feel like I was worth it, so anything goes kind of attitude I had about myself, even though I would be polite and respectful to adults for the most part, unless there were authority figures that frustrated me. And I'll get to your question in just a second, but I definitely remember when I was in one hospital when I was maybe 11 or 12, and I didn't read a report, but I definitely heard the doctors talk to my parents, and they were saying very similar things when it came to, like I was well spoken, I was witty, or I had those things down, but as far as just self appraisal, really low. Couldn't develop a rapport with anybody. All my friendships were kind of awkward, where I felt like the underling or just the person that, was not relatable, I guess, which figures into some other weird things from my childhood of parents of friends being kind of wary of me and thinking that I was going to have some episode with them or that I was a liability or something, and which obviously affects your self-appraisal.
Yeah.
I definitely had some ultimately bad thoughts about myself and what I should do with myself. I've definitely been told things from around that time period, of things I did, like, just episodes with my sisters that I do not remember at all. And same thing, I feel like I have memory is always fallible, but I feel like I have a pretty solid memory of that time period, even from when I was like, 4 and 5, and birthday parties I can remember being at and who was there, and, what the color theme was for this party or this place, or what the teacher's name was. Just, I remember all these little details. But there are definitely things that are, I guess, maybe kind of traumatic, whether it happened to me or somebody else, that is a fact of memory for somebody, but I do not remember it, even if I was the direct participant. And that's always kind of mystified me. And I don't really know where that sits in the spectrum of, what I've got, quote unquote. But yeah, it's really weird how closely I related to everything you just said, kind of in my own way. The context was different, but the words are the same and the feeling's the same.
Absolutely. I think that also kind of speaks to the empathy theme that comes up, that I referenced earlier, as far as it coming up on this show, because I think we're so used to being looked at differently, seeing that look.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette Syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org.
I always feel like I have a lot in common with adopted people, even though my sister's technically adopted. My mom's definitely adopted and has the issues of that. So as far as, what's it called? Not separation anxiety. Whatever that is, that comes with that. Like I relate to that kind of trauma. Mm-hmm. And it's just a lot of that is because at its core, it's the people you trust either not being there or at all in that case, or not being there in a partial way, which is its own weird case, which can happen when you are diagnosed with something as uniquely as Tourette's. My mother I remember her just telling me today, thinking like, just thinking about how happy she was that she finally knew what the journey, the multi-year journey came to an end as far as figuring out what it was, but then realizing the life sentence had just bought me and her as my mother, boy, was she scared. She was like, I'm not going to lie. I was looking back. I was terrified then.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, and I think that's kind of why we're very, empathetic. Because I remember, at school again during this time, I was kind of surprised these papers I was looking at. It doesn't say till 1996, so I was in 6th grade, and I was like, "Why is it 92, 93?" And again, like I told you guys, it was. My mother was like, "Well, that's when we started the journey. We didn't it took till 96 for us to get the official diagnosis. And I remember that's probably why there was so much weirdness, especially the elementary school years where they had the quick fix where they would want you to go, where they kind of looped all the special ed kids in one. And I remember just being terrified and either not going or purposely showing up late because I didn't want other kids see me to go to that part of the hallway. You know, I didn't want to be associated in that way. But then when I couldn't hide it anymore, and especially when I was a kid, it was, your typical, breathing, scrunching of the face, nodding of the head, huffing voice. And I had this other one, which I reverse engineered to shadow boxing. It's where this is probably more familiar to people our age and ilk, just like certain words aren't thankfully no longer okay to say, like the R word, right? A lot of times kids in the 90s, when they were using these slangs like the R word, they would do this motion with their hand and kind of hit their chest. Do you know what
I remember that.
And I'm only saying that because the ironic part was one of my tics actually very much resembled that. And it wasn't because of that. So it was a very triggering thing to always see that, because mine was, I didn't hit my chest, but I would snap, and I don't even know if you could pick it up on the mic, but you'd almost hear the snap. I snap it inwards, like almost like walk like an Egyptian, making like the snake with your arm, but your wrist is loose and you're snapping it inwards. Now I reverse engineered that, because when you shadow box and when you punch, it's almost like a corkscrew mechanic. And the reverse engineer of that is like corkscrew mechanic. So when I got into martial arts and punching, it became a more natural way, like whether you're just a kid in 1993 and me and my friends from Taekwondo went to see Mortal Kombat, and we're all jacked, full of sugar and soda. And then we go on my friend's trampoline and we're throwing jump kicks, dun, 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 right? Yeah. Like it's very acceptable, right? And, but even it was something I hung on to, because even when I was at, for example, a cash register, let's say, I'm working up at the registers at part of the prominent health food store I reference. Everyone knows Dan does and competes martial arts. It's much more acceptable if they look over and they see Dan throwing punches, it's just the weird martial arts guy. And that's a much easier label to wear than being the Tourette's guy. So I was able to do a lot with these tics as I've been, and disguise them even from myself, to where I don't even realize that I'm still carrying from vocal here and there, even a lot of tics with me even till now. So sorry, I kind of jumped ahead in speed there, but yeah.
Wow. So I think you had mentioned, that you weren't necessarily, and your business is your business, and anything anybody doesn't want to tell anybody is their prerogative. But you had mentioned that some people know your background, or they at least know about TS in your life, but it's not necessarily something that you're completely wide open about. Is that something you see changing, or is that what do you think's ahead for you?
Kind of like with this business, and what I would say to other people is, based off the people who inspired me, who as far as I don't have Tourette's, but they created their own lane. And as far as a career, and those are kind of the best stories. And I ended up doing the same. In fact, the same format that I used on my original website, which is still at mixedmartialanalyst.com, is still the adopted format that is, you can still see it on the USA Today Sports website. So, so sorry, I'm wow, my short-term memory is going all over the place here. But so I got you. I'm here. So essentially, as far as your question, I'm using that theory. I want to make my own opportunity to speak more about it, because I haven't spoke much about it. And, for whatever, from where I got sidetracked earlier, from early on in life when I was getting sent to the nurse's office, and that's where, I was meant to say in elementary school. And I'm writing huff puffs and tics. And Tim, it's audio where I'm speaking to you. You can't see me. Your listeners can't see me. But I think we can all know the face that I probably got from the nurse, especially in the early 90s, when I write my symptoms as huff, puffs, tics. And just getting used to that look of judgment, right? Maybe you got a similar look from your parents' friends, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can all relate to. That shouldn't take me too many calories to explain. I think we all, I got that. To, junior high, I've got the official diagnosis, and the special ed teachers know. And I remember this one, and I'll just I only know is her last name, and she deserves to be outed, if anything, if I knew her full name. But Wingard, just a mean lady who just had her own issues and was taking it out on children, man. And I saw some of her comments in the report too, which were funnily disproven by factual tests. But she just took me literally for when I said that I didn't remember about a homework assignment, because that's like a kid's number 2 excuse next to my dog ate it.
Right.
And of course, she took that literal, not due to the fact that, especially with a kid with Tourette's, that she is literally punking him in front of the whole class, yelling, raising her voice, taking away from the lesson from the teacher, and taking away from the attention of the students so they can all watch me get reprimanded and have, and I was a very organized kid too. And I told her, I remember one time I didn't have my assignment back. This is a nod to your Australian guy you had who said the teachers were bullies. This is what came to mind when he said that. And I remember just trying to get her off my back. So I forgot, just give me the punishment. I'll take it, just make this moment pass. I don't like attention on me. Right. Even as a birthday, as a kid, I'd be like, why are these kids singing happy? Why does anybody care about me? One, it's just a birthday. And that's this weird, bad value I have of myself, right?
No,
so,
I'm exactly the same way.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that's what's comforting of being on here. But she didn't take that and was frustrated and goes, I bet it's in here somewhere, takes my backpack. And I remember just dumps it on my desk. All my papers go everywhere. And I remember her going, look how disorganized you are. And I'm like, I'm disorganized because you just dumped my backpack. I actually keep it in meticulous order. So I'm very OCD. And that was the person I was supposed to be going for help, And then when I got to actual good caseload managers in high school or later in junior high, like, why aren't you taking advantage of the extra things we've afforded you? And why aren't you advocating? That was the big word, right? Advocate for yourself, Dan. You need to advocate for yourself. And I don't know if this kid, Michael, and I'll save his last name for obvious reasons, seemed like a nice enough kid. He's definitely dealing with his own thing. They always tend to push me his way. Maybe he had Tourette's. If he did, it wasn't obvious, but I always got that vibe. But they'd always want me to be like Michael. Like, why don't you sit in front of the class like Michael does? I'm like, that is spitball range, folks. You guys dumb? I'm not getting spitballed up there. Like, you should at least use the word processor. Like, in the mid 90s, so he's carried around this huge word processor to type out. Right? I haven't even taken a keyboarding class because I'm sure they make kids do it earlier, Ben. But back then they didn't make us do it till high school, right? So I'm like, I'm not going to learn how to use this thing. They're like, why don't you use the word? I'm like, processor. I'm like, listen, Michael's getting his ass kicked like at least once a week in the back hall after 5th period. I'm not about that life. Okay. Like, I had to, and then, you go up and again, like it's tough to find people to trust. Or with my head trauma incident with the insurance and people I thought I had great, both rapport professionally and personally with, and watching my own company, not just fire me over missed days because I couldn't work from the head trauma. By the way, like literally 3 or 4 years, not missed a day of attendance. Like, that's a normal for me as far as work history goes and the kind of worker I am. But they literally went to court to deny me the COBRA medical and benefits for the couple months after. They sent a representative who dressed me down. Jeez. And it brought me back PTSD to every doctor, special ed teacher that I just cited, and just made me feel like the littlest person. And I thought I was like Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting. Like, I went and got there's one of 2 people who legally, through the NRS statutes here in Nevada, that can prescribe a concussion. I thankfully knew one of them. One of them worked with fighters from the gym, got specific documentation from him, plus all the medical documentation, keeping record, and went above and beyond, found their own literature, which highlighted it. And I had it all ready, and they didn't even let me cite my case. Like they literally, it was literally someone of professional stature telling you that the sky is red and you need to accept that. And I never forgot that, and it still burns, but it didn't burn me. I let it motivate me. And I still haven't gone back into that grocery store to do my victory lap, which I could have plenty of times. That's not my wiring. Because, like the old cliche saying, the best revenge is living a good life. And whether it's Tourette's or something else traumatic that may have happened to me, you, or your listeners, that's about the only advice I can give is someone, who survived their own version of trauma. And you got to believe that you're stronger for it. And the best way to to get back at anybody is not really to get back at them, is just to kind of live the best for yourself. And like the CBS journalist said, I agree. We're in the same thing, right? And you just said so yourself with the photography. I totally see that, by the way. You're an artist in one way. You're an artist in every way. We could talk about that some other time. But, like he said, it's being in the media, everyone's competing with each other and backstabbing each other. And it's really, and this parlays to your original question, by the way, and it's really gross. And like for me, I'm never trying to be the best analyst. I'm always like the first dude. I'm the worst businessman. I'm always giving shout outs to other podcasts, like to other analysts who do the same work as me. Because I feel like if you do something good, you should be recognized. I don't care about the politics. I don't care about politics in general. I'm certainly not going to care about the petty ones. And, the only professional goal I have, honestly, and this is my only bucket list, is just to call fights. Because when I was a kid with this Tourette's, for whatever reason, one of the only things that could get me to read was like sports. I was a big Chicago Bulls, Scottie Pippen fan. And I would watch the TV and I would take my own stats. And this was before internet, folks, early 90s, or before the internet as we know it, right? And I would wait for the newspaper the next day. And I would compare my stats in the paper, and I'd argue they were padding Jordan's stats, not giving enough credit to my guy Pippen. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Tourette's people have an affinity for underdogs and people that don't get enough credit, right? It's kind of how we're geared, right? Totally. So I identified that bias early, and my grandmother, she deserves her own podcast, man. I mean, a woman, older woman, a Chinese woman. You want to talk about breaking stereotypes? She, is one of the first, as far as recognized, as far as businesses, first woman in the United States to run her own airline, Scenic Air Tours, in Hawaii. And she made a hefty amount of money and retired, let's just say. Didn't need the money. But again, breaking stereotype, she ran an illegal bookie out of her house. And every Friday, she also ran illegal card games in which prominent people, political figures, even of the state of Hawaii, would come, and she would have me and my cousins. We'd have to prepare the tables, shuffle the decks. And then during the day, while she was taking bookie orders and watching basketball, that's how my love for basketball came. So I always joke with my grandmother, who's the only remaining grandparent alive. She's got a motor on her, let me tell you. We joke where I'm at now. I'm like, now I'm actually working for betting sites and for sports sites and covering professional sports. And I credit a lot of those habits that I had as a child to her spare room when she was supposed to be babysitting us. And I can see why my mother was always stressing out when she was babysitting us, because she wasn't babysitting. She was making us help her with illegal activities. This is all past date, so I don't mind sharing this. So. But sorry to long-winded tangent there. So, but you fast forward, and even within this competitive industry that I'm talking about, and by the way, I've had really well-intentioned people who I'm still friends with, I still work with. I'm not saying it because I still work with them and they'd probably listen to this, but they probably would listen to this because they're genuinely good people and they genuinely care. I don't hold it against them, but I'm sure you've experienced this, Ben, and many of your guests, I've heard their own version where people, they don't have any understanding of it, but they mean well. And they suggest for you to, maybe you should keep that to yourself, bud. Yeah. Or they will downplay it for being a reason, and not because they're trying to shut you down. They mean well. I believe a lot, even people that I'm not friends with, and for good reason, not friends with them, and maybe bad things or this, I still, when it comes to that, I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I do genuinely believe that a lot of the times they really do mean well for what it's worth. Yeah. But I remember there's a guy in our space named Mauro Ranallo. I don't know if that name rings a bell. He's one of the most popular announcers for boxing, professional wrestling, and mixed martial arts. So he's got the trifecta. He works for Showtime Sports, and he came out about being manic depressive bipolar, I believe is the official. Forgive me if I got that wrong, but it's one of the more, I guess, for lack of a better word, potent versions of it, right? There's a bunch of different versions where you can go manic for days and have like real episodes. Thankfully, Showtime was not just behind him about it when he came out about it, but they actually put a special called the Bipolar Rock and Roller, which is his nickname. They weren't trying to be tasteless with that. That's his actual self-appointed nickname, the Bipolar Rock and Roller. And it was just very inspiring because he's a guy that I love in general. You don't have to tell me any of that. And he was already one of my favorite announcers in the space. I'm lucky enough to meet him. And I remember that really inspired me when it came out a couple of years ago. And I was working as well for Sirius XM at the time, doing daily radio. And I remember I had a colleague because we had a neurologist come on, and I remember really upset that day. And they're like, why are you so upset? And usually I didn't mind when I had to, because basically the setup was I was doing production duties, and unless they needed a specific analyst job, I was more kind of on the side, which was fine. I was joining someone else's established show. It's an amazing show. Grateful to be on there. These are great guys, and I'm so lucky to have met them. They're one of the few people, and I mean that because again, I count my real friends on one hand. There's some of those people, right? So in no way was it bad, but they could tell I was upset. And usually it's not an ego thing, man. I don't care about the spotlight, and I wanted to let them know that it wasn't that. But we had a neurologist, and more specifically, it was a young neurologist. And most of my experiences are for a lot of Tourette's people, especially around our age, I guess, Ben, we have that old deal. We had the uphill battle against the more old school neurologists. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like Hollywood. You hear about, the old guys are getting phased out in Hollywood. They're getting more progressive now. Like, I feel like neurologists had a similar turnover timeline from the 90s to now, right?
Right.
We've been waiting for a lot of them to die out, for lack of a better word. I'm sorry, folks, just saying. But like, and so I was so jacked, like, because this guy sounds like, and he dealt with concussions and other things that, again, very much relate to me, right? And it's its own other battle. And I believe it was then they're one of the few people who I let them know that I had Tourette's, and this was why it was bothering me. I really wanted to get some questions and answers in. It wasn't, it wasn't just another normal interview for someone like me. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It was an opportunity, at least how I looked at it. And I wanted to apologize because I'm not the type to justfully or unjustfully, be butthurt and, for lack of a better word, and command attention unfairly on me. It does happen, and I feel completely guilty when it does. So that I wanted to let them know that was not my intention. And kind of like what you and I believe Tim, friend of the show, friend of me, myself, said, I believe in your conversation, where like you're afraid of a really bad reaction, which clearly I've gotten in my life, right? But you're always afraid of that bad reaction. But a lot of times, which I hope is the truth for most people, is at worst, people just could care less. And that's kind of what I've gotten from ex-close friends who I shared it with. They just kind of shut out, really didn't, and really gave it no credit. And they didn't call me a liar or anything like that, but they certainly weren't sympathetic or curious or fill in the blank of word. And these guys were more so than that, to their credit, but they also recommended in reference, because I brought up, the bipolar rock and roll and Mauro Ronaldo there. And again, he's public about his story, so I don't mind sharing his name there. But and I understand, I'm not popular as him, and I probably will never be as popular as him. That's totally cool. But when I saw that documentary, I saw him, and what it did inspired me. I said, what if I could do that? And I didn't know about the Tourette's podcast at this point. This was probably late 2017, so you didn't even start the Tourette's podcast yet, even if I punched it in, right? Mm-hmm. So, but it planted that seed, right? As far as putting your energy in a positive. Not putting yourself on the cross. I ain't Jesus, you don't come off that way. I know it's not what you're trying to do, but you do want to put yourself up on that collage, though, of a positive example, I dare say. And I kind of got the advice of maybe not the greatest idea. And, between that, having friends, again, like I told you, special ed teacher, all these different chapters of the life, and not having the best responses, even though they may have been more humane as time went on, it didn't exactly make me want to come out with it. So that's why it wasn't until perusing about an article Tim wrote about head trauma, which obviously caught my eye. I go to Tim's profile. I've seen Tim in the space for a couple of years, but I never really went to his profile. It said Tourette's on there. And he's 35 as well. And he became the first person that I knowingly spoke to with Tourette's. And he said, listen to this podcast I did. This might help.
Wow.
Sorry, I dumped a lot on it. Hopefully the timeline is somewhat easy for your listeners to follow there, but yeah.
No, it makes so much sense. I mean, even from what you were saying about, like Scottie Pippen and, kind of putting high stock in the underdog or the person you don't think is the person or thing that, isn't getting quite the attention that you think they should. And, their brand is not being quite as celebrated. And it's almost like, for me anyway, if something is sort of in the space of, I guess I'll use cameras as an example. There's the camera brand that everybody goes to, and then there's the one that kind of gets bagged on.
Yeah.
The one that gets bagged on, I was like, it exists. There's a team of people who've put it together. They can't just like be in their own little vacuum putting together something that is a piece of junk again and again and again. If it's priced this much, I want to learn more about it, versus kind of like going to where everybody else is going. This one big camera that everybody else is using. I want to check out this other one because maybe there's something about it. Maybe it's almost like you just have this natural built-in kind of curiosity for things that are the underdog because you can maybe personally relate to it. You weren't taken seriously at this one point in your life or at, many points in your life. Maybe that's been a theme in your life of just not being taken seriously. And the empathy piece comes in and you really see where people are coming from. And if you see someone or something, really doing good stuff, but is not really getting their due, you really kind of gravitate toward that. You want to celebrate them and let them know. And, like, I'm here for you, or I'm going to buy your product. I think it's great, and there's just something about that versus doing, I think, what's kind of the safe thing, which is going to where maybe everybody else is going. And that guy who's like, you know what, you might want to keep this to yourself. It's really dangerous because you can develop that character in your head of being like, maybe you shouldn't do that. It's not safe. You might want to keep that to yourself. You might not want to do that. You might not want to share that. And that person exists and they have this sort of like brawny survivalist kind of air about them that is maybe a little bit attractive in some classical way. But but I think because of that and the self-criticism that you can give yourself, it's like that becomes a character in your head to where, like, yeah, you want to value the underdog, but you also kind of want to go with the crowd. And there are these insecurities. And I have that in my head, to this day, all the time, of that voice in my head saying, don't talk about this, or, that's just going to be bad for you.
Totally.
And that was going through my head, even like when I was in the process of starting the podcast of, like, am I going to get fired for this? Or, I even let my bosses know, because there was a media outlet that was interested in writing something about it. And, the people I work with are in the space of government affairs and, there are sensitivities there. So I let them know as a consideration, even though I didn't have to. I mean, this is my story, my
right.
medical thing, or, however you want to categorize it. They don't go seeking their superiors' permission to talk about high blood pressure or whatever it is, but this, it felt like it was some, really stigmatized thing, and I better let them know as a consideration. And just doing that, I knew I was kind of devaluing myself and what I had. And that voice was in my head of like, no, just don't tell them. Maybe don't even do the podcast. Because, if something happens with this job and you have to apply for a new one, they Google you and they see you as the guy with Tourette Syndrome, you're not getting the job. Your resume's in the trash can. And I was really thinking that what I found, at least for my case, and this is not universal, a lot of people have really difficult stories, but it sort of benefited me in this weird way, being able to talk about it, having a different perspective. I think them knowing that I might have had, kind of a different angle on looking at things and also being curious about the subjects that I think kind of get swept away or don't quite get the attention. And that's sort of the empathy for the underdog. And it's
totally,
there's so much there that I think you can just like string a single piece of thread all the way through. And, it sounds so abstract and how it all relates together, but it really does in a really solid way.
Believe it or not, my line of work, I got to be careful because if I started picking all underdogs, I would do really bad, really fast. And I actually pick more, as we say, chalk, to use betting terms, than underdogs. But no. I totally resonate. All honesty, jokes aside, with everything you just said there. And in fact, it can be dangerous to get that voice in your head. Like I joke, my audience, like self-deprecating Dan over here, whenever I'm like,
I self-deprecate like crazy,
and I'll do it aloud kind of. For one, I have to host a podcast by myself, which is difficult. And you're you're breaking down fights. It can be very mundane week after week. So part of me tried to get a little bit of therapy. And the best way I have therapy is, it's not the best way for everybody, folks, but I do joke about things, which is why my humor is very dark. I've kind of created a brand, and I'll notice I'll get comments, and I really should get way more negative comments with the status of the internet, much less the people in the MMA portion of the internet. But I really don't get many. But I remember I got one last week of like, this guy's all over the place, I can't follow him. But then it was great because I literally got like 4 or 5 more comments, including from a podcast whose job it is to critique podcasts in this space about, Dan was a bit all over the place, but that's the beauty of his podcast. That's the beauty of Dan Tom. He's everywhere, man. And, you kind of have that manic energy, if you will. And I think back with the shadow boxing and parlaying these things, I think that's how I've disguised the Tourette's, even from myself. And I mean, that's why I did acting and I did martial arts.
Yeah.
I did martial arts. These were survival skills, folks. This was, I had to find a way quick. Like, you talk about other things that make you attracted to the underdog, or those things like, and other listeners have, whether they're gay, whether they're, I believe, the mother, the young boy, Angel, I believe his name was, sounded like a sweet boy, and they were of Hispanic.
Angel and Daisy. Yeah.
Yes. And, there's a cultural element. I'm a dark-skinned Asian, folks, Asian American. And whether you're doing the Asian part, there's not a lot of role models. There's not a lot of representation. And if you're just judging me by a dark skin, then I pick up a lot of the other stereotypes, especially when I'm working construction in a place like Las Vegas. People will come up to me and say, "Senor." Maybe my mustache is growing out because my anxiety is not allowing me to trim it. I look more Hispanic. So I kind of get the worst of both worlds, so to speak, as far as those go. And that's also made me very sensitive to, I guess, stories and perceptions, and especially false perceptions, right? And things like that, because that's its own struggle, both outwardly and inwardly. It's a big reason why perhaps some of my family members had trouble accepting these things, right? Asians, it's very, it's old school, man, how they judge the boy to the girl, or even the firstborn boy to the not firstborn boy, to all these things, it's a very no one cares, and no one does care. You see, we don't really get much representation for the populace we have worldwide and within the country. You learn real quick, like, okay, that's not going to be there. And just like my acting teacher, Gerald Gordon, who taught plenty of people. He's old. He might have passed by now. He was in movies and extras like with Gene Kelly back in the day, but he was a renowned acting teacher. Probably more popular name you guys would be familiar with is Adrian Brody. And that was probably one of my best accomplishments in acting before I pulled out of it. And he didn't talk me out of it. But I was, just long story short, was able to audition and get in a very prestigious class. It's very tough to get into. And he said, Gerald said, "Dan, I don't know what it is about you Asians." This is a really old school guy, not very sensitive, right? But he was just like, "You're some of the most talented. You're easily the most talented actors I've worked with, but it's just sad because there's no parts for you in Hollywood." And he wasn't trying to discourage me when he was having this conversation. He was simply telling the truth. And I don't mean to get sidetracked on this whole thing here, but it does kind of compound to a lot of the things I'm sharing with your listeners, as far as
absolutely
perhaps from inside the bases with the family and how they react culturally to, things you're trying to, fight otherwise. Not only did I look a certain way, referencing the report, I was the last pick for my abilities. I wasn't doing that great in team sports, right? And like a lot of people who gravitate toward martial arts, there's a lot, whether it's trauma, single parent families, and other many relatable things that I relate to. These people, they didn't like team sports either. They didn't, even if they were athletic, they didn't excel at team sports. So I drew to martial arts, I drew to acting, and those were like my shields. You know, to quote a fighter, Nick Diaz, in this behind the scenes special, I don't know what Nick's dealing with. I don't think it's Tourette's, but he's definitely has things that, you know, I think he deals with, self-admitted social anxiety. He even medicates himself a certain way that I've opted to in recent years. But I always kind of judge this guy. This thug guy. This guy just smokes weed and gives the middle finger, has a bad attitude. And they did like the special on him. And he had a really social anxiety, had a tough time opening up. So the production behind the scene, they had to scramble. The guy was a flake, so they had to go like find, they're already in his hometown. Like, let's go find his teachers and interview them and see what they can get. And there's just this super relatable piece where the teacher's talking about, you know, she's seeing where her student went. She had no idea he grew up and became a fighter. She's watching and she's like, I still see the same kid. He still thinks twice before he talks. He takes deep breaths between his words. He's very insecure about certain things. And you start growing more empathy, and he's talking about switching schools. And I didn't have a lot of switching schools, but as far as what I was telling you about my school experience and the tests and the, you know, there was moving. I moved from Hawaii up to the mainland. There was an integration period there, right, as well. And so I really relate to this. And I think a lot of Tourette's people, including maybe yourself, Ben, can relate to this. And he goes, I don't know if I really, in reference to moving around schools, I don't know if I really learned a lot about school. In fact, I don't know how much I learned in school, but I did learn a lot about people. I learned a lot about people. And I feel like Tourette's, the reason perhaps why we're so empathetic is because whether we want it or not, we earn ourselves a PhD in people.
Totally.
It could be a very much harder degree for some people to earn than others. I consider myself lucky, even in my spectrum of Tourette's. I consider, you know, and I'm not saying that to disparage the people who have more severe cases. I'm just simply saying that I'm empathetic and understanding, and I'm grateful, I guess, as kindly as possible. Hopefully people take that in the spirit that it's meant. But yeah, I do believe to different degrees, sure, but I think we all learn a lot about people, man.
That is so true. I mean, that's it is a master class in human interaction. It makes me, I think it's one of the reasons why I've found photography so enjoyable for me is I do a lot of street photography, and that's me going into public spaces that I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable in.
Nice.
And it gives me kind of a purpose, but it's like I enjoy people watching, and I enjoy interaction and you know, the confidence that people carry with themselves, and trying to analyze, you know, like, is this fronting or is this authentic, or, you know, are they putting it on, or like, what's this person's story? And I'm never going to know. I'm not going to stop. And like, sometimes I do stop and talk to people if I see someone who looks really interesting and they look like they might be okay with being photographed, and I'll take a portrait of them and give it to them. And it's a really nice, quick conversation. It's totally out of character for me, but I do it, I think, for the challenge of it. But it totally ties in with just being fascinated by people, because I've always felt different from other people.
Totally.
And maybe everybody's going to say that in one way or the other, but I mean, people are fascinating to me, and it's because I've encountered, I think, the best and the worst, you know, kind of going through, and you know, we all run into our extremes and things we can label the best or the worst, but just going through this range of like, okay, I know what this person's thinking about me. I'm not what they're thinking, but I can read their face. I know that expression. I've seen it a million times. They're thinking that I'm not, you know, on their level or whatever it is. That's just like one small example, but the whole thing just makes me fascinated with human interaction, looking at people, how they talk to each other and have conversations with each other, and how casual and relaxed they seem and not self-conscious. It just, all of that, you know, I could watch it. I don't mean in some creepy voyeuristic way. I just mean like it's something that I'm always thinking about and I'm always fascinated by.
I love that. I've heard you speak on similar things. Not just that, but having that, you're speaking in the reference of being a photographer, which by the way is awesome. It's an art form that I've always loved and dabbled with, although I gave up on my Canon XLR, and I was learning how to shoot manual for a little bit there on some travels. But no, I really love that artwork. But I've heard you speak about this also, Ben, being a kid, as a kid, and your guests speak of it, having that motor and dynamic as a kid. And not only can I relate to that, but also relating that to perhaps the acting part, and why I felt why I felt like I perhaps excelled on that. And not to sound, I definitely don't want to sound like an actor and what's my motivation. And like, believe me, I'm not that. Like, as soon as someone busted off a Stanislavski book, I'm like, whose points are you trying to get? Teacher's not around. Put that away. I'm totally not that guy. But at the same time, there is something to that where, for example, this makes sense. I'll encapsulate it with this example. Even as a young child, when I saw a homeless person, and it wasn't because I was elevated. I and the people around me, I'm sure, had the reactions like, "Ooh, geez, why you keep? Ooh, don't let him touch you. Don't stay away from the homeless man." Whatever. I'm sure there was those baseline judgments installed. But my first thought always was, "What's the highlight of that guy's day?"
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was partially, okay, if it's as bad as everybody's saying, as society's saying, what if that was me? Maybe the empathetic part kicking in really early. But then I realized, right? What if I was in that situation? How would you survive day to day? Imagine that. Like, that's where you sleep. And I would put myself in that person's shoes. And then not just there, I would go, okay, now that I'm in this person's shoes, what's the highlight of your day? Is it begging, hoping you're clearly not going to buy a house and start a family with the money he's asking for on the street corner that I'm watching. But when he has enough for, and I'm not even old enough to drink or have never tried alcohol. I'm a young kid, but I'm like, maybe he's just trying to buy that beer. Is that the highlight of his day? And I don't know if that's what made acting come as something that I dare say natural to me, but I do think it explains, more importantly, that empathy and perhaps some kind of common thread that we have where we're thinking, we're putting ourselves in people's shoes at a baseline of that minutia, is that basically all I do is I put myself in someone else's shoes. So back to what you were saying about friends and or people giving that advice, and me saying I've had friends that's, whether they play it, say, give you advice, or some senses like an ex-best friend more recently, kind of just didn't really give credence, and don't get me wrong, man. Like I tell my listeners, you don't have to like me. I totally understand I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea as a podcaster. And I think that applies for life. And I think we all need to understand that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's so frustrating because back to your thing of being frustrated for being misunderstood, because of my lack of things that people from relationships and friendships, like people have had a superfluous amount of, like I always get the biggest jealousy I have is of TV or commercials, that friends group, because I've found myself my whole life envying that, like the friends that take you up and put, pick you up after you got your heart broke or this or that. Like, even when I was lucky enough to, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, have friend circles when things came up. And again, this is nothing against them. And I learned that it was wrong, by the way, for me to have these expectations. So I'm taking accountability here too. So I learned not to have that, but for what it's worth, no, even when I was lucky enough to have, quote unquote, friends groups, they weren't the type to rally around or wonder how you were doing. So even if they meant well, it always was hard to take them seriously, whether they wanted to know or it was me offering up information personally about myself, whether it was about Tourette's or another issue that I'm struggling with of depression or head trauma or whatever. And I don't blame anybody for not wanting to be a part of that mess, man. Like, I get it. But at the same time, it's hard to take it coming from somebody who, everybody has their own struggles, don't get me wrong, but let's just say I can safely say from multiple check boxes, visible to invisible stuff, right? This person was at the very least at the average Joe line and didn't have anything that could be relatable. And I'm not using that to demean or discredit that person, by the way. But just speaking honestly, it's hard to take those kind of criticisms because, again, like you said, those criticisms start to stick with you, whether these people realize it or not. because you've been getting these criticisms your whole life from other people who are not qualified to give it.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's from the best intention from someone close to you, it becomes very hard to take that seriously when they are so rich and wealthy beyond their dreams and you just want them to see it. In fact, that's one of my biggest pet peeves in life. I still have trouble dealing with when I see people that are so rich in things, very basic things, that I and many would, forgive my French, but give my left nut for, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
and you're telling me, and in return, you're telling me with something super uber complicated like Tourette's, what my feelings should be.
Right.
Or that you're just going through a phase, or I'm afraid you're going to, take your own life. But instead of asking you that you're going to be okay, I'm going to go out to your family members because I'm a very bad communicator, which has happened before, right? Mm. And had that thrown against me. And then that family member who has no idea I'm struggling through things, a random person on Facebook brought this up to me. And then you have to explain that to them. And I feel silly talking about it now because I've grown from those episodes. There's been many where I've struggled with that. But that's also why it was so powerful, back referencing to that piece of paper I read this morning where, the saying, it's tongue of cheek, right? Back before I can remember. Like, no, literally, back before I can remember. I have written proof. I wanted to be dead for some reason. I don't even remember saying that shit, pardon my French. And so it really just makes me laugh at all these people who have, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm scoring over spilt milk, but you can't help but think of all the people who just, and not just my journey, again, people listening have had their own version of this that would just demean someone else's journey, no matter what it is, even without the Tourette's. Let's just say it's the head trauma, and it's insane because one thing can change it, folks, and I knew that going in whenever I signed up for a fight, even before this happened to me, I knew that all it takes is one rogue shot to the head. My life has changed. Or with my mother's case, it takes one visit to the doctor, one elongated headache, and your life should have been over in her case, but it's forever changed. And now she's learning all these things that I've had to deal with from my head trauma thing. So it's just crazy how these things can really, really come full circle. And I think to finish of this repetitive come full circle theme as to why I've come to you today is, I think, not to timestamp the episode, but I think this pandemic has put a lot of us on a level playing field. Again, I'm not trying to express any type of joy here. I don't wish anybody to have walked my miles or the miles of other people I've heard that bravely enough share their story with you. And I'm grateful for them for. I wouldn't wish that on people, though. However, with everybody being stuck inside and having things taken away from them, we talked about even seeing the greatest athletes. You take away something so key like exercise, that messes up the insides of anybody, right? The chemicals, all that good stuff, the important stuff, even the strongest people. Well, now we're seeing it across with average people, and not just with the Tourette's or the head trauma, but with my line of work, I've narrowed it down to under 70 or 80 hours, no exaggeration. But I literally probably don't take days off. I haven't taken a day off in a couple years, a few years. Literally work 7 days a week, 60, 70 hours. Not playing a violin, not asking for sympathy. But that and the nature of my job, and with the head trauma, not being able to work out even when I do have the free time, which is not the case anymore, thankfully, but through injuries and health issues, I've been living this pandemic life before 2020 for years now, as far as lack of communication. And I would try to explain to the few friends I had that aren't online or colleague based, right? That the importance of going out to dinner and doing things. But again, the maturity and the other things maybe not all lined up. So perhaps and obviously they're different people, and you can't expect things of people, folks. You got to keep your expectations in check, right? But they didn't exactly see the importance of that. And, like, as I kind of alluded to, those friendships that eventually faded, and I had enough. I'm not going to play that role. I'm not going to be that role. I know my value.
Right.
And again, I take no joy in it, but now you fast forward since then, separating those things, still working, still living my almost pandemic lifestyle before the pandemic hits. Now the pandemic hits. Now everybody's indoors. Now everybody's seeing, and I don't like it, by the way. It's not good. There should be more of a focus on the mental health aspect of what everybody's going through worldwide, by the way. I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm not taking any joy. But it's almost like we're on a level playing field, because now people who may have not have taken it seriously are taking it seriously because it's happening to them. And they're realizing that this isn't just a shuffle of the deck that I can just go on living my life. No, I'm a human being. We are in this together, as they say, not in the way they mean, but we are in this together, folks. And yeah, we deal with a lot of the same stuff. So seeing that happen now, as almost, to spin this in a positive, it also made me feel like now's the appropriate time to talk about these things, because whether it's the hours that I work, that I'm feeling burnt out, and at this rate, I'll probably shoot myself in the foot for something else, non-Tourette's, if I don't come out with it now. You know what I'm saying? Which, by the way, I've got a vacation coming up in November, folks. I finally am taking one, even though it is going to be to spend, hopefully, to bury my grandfather. We're still trying to work that out. He died right in the beginning of COVID, my mom's father. So it's been crazy times. So nevertheless, I won't be working, at least. So I will be taking a break from that. But I do feel that all those things combined just makes it a good time to come out and talk about these things, because it is empowering. And you know what? I can complain about, the fact that I can count friends and long-term serious relationships on one hand, or I can help people that I need both hands, both feet, and much more to count. And I'm going to try to work in that direction instead.
Man, we've covered so much ground, and all of it has been, it's hard to believe we've been going for 2 hours. I mean, it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
There's nothing I would change about it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Wow. That's a huge compliment coming from yourself. The amazing, and I don't use that lightly, amazing guests you've had on the show, Ben. So thank you. That means a lot, man. And I'm surprised we went so long too. And I definitely don't want to keep you longer, but there is, I guess, one more thing. If we do have the time, I would like to just get off my chest on the way out. And we don't have to dive into it, but more of a get off my chest. And I kind of alluded to it with medicating, when I talked about a certain character medicating himself, and how that kind of made a stigma in my head of, this guy's not a good dude. He's a bad dude. And I'm not a doctor, so in no way am I preaching, and I wouldn't preach to anybody to use this in general. Just for for fun, right? Even as safe and demonized as marijuana or medical marijuana is. But as someone, and I'm very familiar to the story, my body is my temple. I hated the smell, all of those things. But somewhere about 10 years ago, stumbled onto it off of advice off of one of the medical practitioners in Hawaii, nurse practitioners, I forget. They're essentially the person who follows up with what the practitioner or the person diagnoses. So I think it was like the comparison to a psychotherapist to a psychiatrist. One's more about the process, talking things, looking at information, whereas the others kind of can just dispense some medicine if you're not careful who you pick. So this was the more human and educated mind to speak to, and he was on his way to an Obama conference. This is how long ago it was at the time. And he was one of 2 representatives from Hawaii, so it was a pretty high-ranking dude. And we were talking about multiple of things, but he told me a roommate of his, who eventually became a lawyer, was with Tourette's, how marijuana was like a medical drug. And I eventually tried it myself and have had, just in short, positive results. It helped me compete in mixed martial arts, drop weight, focus, mood, all these different things, colitis, stomach issues, things that I've dealt with. But yes, the Tourette's, obviously, mainly. And that's another stigma. Again, I feel like I'm only into things that are invisible or visibly with a stigma, whether it's, culturally, or marijuana, or things like head trauma that you can't see, or my Tourette's, which you necessarily can't see. But that seems to be, these things all seem to connect. And again, being more comfortable being labeled as the weird guy who shadow boxes in his cubicle. Easier to wear that label than the Tourette's guy. What I would learn is I would try to hide it, and I still do to this day. I don't talk about it too openly. I've mentioned it a bit, like even on my own podcast, so it's not getting me in trouble. It's legal here, and I obviously have a condition that's more than justified for a prescription. But I've been very secretive about that as well. And that's also weighed on me, because it's like, Al Pacino from Devil's Advocate comes into my voice. Who are you carrying all those bricks for? It's like, yeah, who am I carrying all these bricks for? So I'm dumping them on your podcast, Ben. But no. But yes, I just wanted to get that off my chest, because, people would pick up on it. And most people are pretty cool. But even when they're cool, I'm like, oh, you notice? And they're like, yeah, man, it's all good. You're Hawaiian. I figured that. And I'm like, and I've learned, I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I get that, like, Hawaiians, okay, I didn't realize that there's this huge stereotype. I'm like, okay, another stereotype. I got to come back here.
Maui Wowie.
Yeah. And I'm like, I discovered as a Hawaiian, oddly enough, that we have this huge stereotype. And I'm like, yeah. And even though I didn't know about it, I would be like, yeah, totally. That's why. Yes. Because I'm Hawaiian. Sure. And because it was much easier, again, to start owning all these stereotypes than to own the one Tourette's. So hopefully everyone's situation is different. I understand it took me a long time, 35 years, but hopefully in closing, I guess from me is that you guys can deal with this brick before you end up carrying a bunch of bricks for other people, because it's not fun. Well, wherever you want to go from here is up to you, Ben. But I can say, from my opinion, the choices you have made from this podcast to whatever choices you've made to treat your life experience, Tourette's or not, or all inclusive, man, I'm glad you did whatever you did, man, because it brought you here, it brought you to this, and you brought this to us. So thank you.
Oh man, I appreciate it. I mean, again, it's totally on the fly, and I'm just happy that it's going the way it's going. Because I mean, for me, the value is like, and this sounds corny, but I mean, the value is totally in just being able to have conversations with other people who speak my language, so to speak, and they know what I'm talking about before I finish, and I don't have to think of 3 to 4 different analogies. Analogies are fun, but I feel like it's difficult for me to have an everyday conversation with most people about a lot of things. And no matter what I'm talking about, even if it's not TS, whatever I'm talking about with people on this podcast, it's fluent and understood. And that's a huge, refreshing therapy session.
It is. And I'm really glad that I chose this as my outlet and chose to speak to you. I don't regret it one bit. This has been fantastic. I feel like I could keep talking your head off. So that's why I'm fearful to say anything else, my friend. But yes, if anybody ever, your listeners, by the way, ever have any questions or anything from Spark from this too, to send my way, that's more than
awesome.
Welcome. I feel like that's one of the benefits about finally opening up, is now being able to find these people to where, now you're not Ben, not the second. Hopefully you won't be the second or the last person I speak to with TS, because at 35 years old, and now including you only knowing 2 people, it feels like too little.
Thanks for listening, for hanging out with me and Dan here. Dan, thanks for spending time with us. Thanks for opening up. If you want to find Dan on social media, reach out, say hey. It's at DanTomMMA on Twitter. He's also a host of the Protect Your Neck podcast. I'll link this stuff in the show notes. And if you want to read his work, it's on MMAjunkie.com. But mostly I hope you enjoyed this conversation and just the depth that I think we reached. Thanks, Dan. And everybody, I truly appreciate the love and support and your participation in the Tourette Gala, which was really successful. Some awesome auction items. By the way, did you win something? Let me know if you want to. You don't have to let me know, but I'm just really curious who won the big ticket items like the trips and the sports memorabilia, the Billie Eilish autograph. Anyway, it was all about raising funds for the Tourette Association so they can keep doing things like these free webinars and support for science and sponsoring Tourette's podcast. Lots and lots done for the community of all ages. And the lens is large on diversity and making everyone with Tourette feel comfortable being themselves. And if you don't feel comfortable in the world at large, hopefully you do here. No matter what your story is, Tourette or not, anything, all ages. Parents, relatives, friends, just stoked you're listening. Send feedback to tourettespodcast@gmail.com or through the contact portal at tourettespodcast.com. At Tourette's Pod on Twitter, Tourette's Podcast on Instagram, patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast if you would like to give individual support to the show and be named as an executive producer. Thanks to Sophia in the UK for maintaining the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. And thanks to Geeks Rising for bringing this podcast to a greater listening audience. Geeks Rising did make contributions to the Tourette Association. Thanks, Bandrew. Thanks, Heather. Go to geeksrising.com for this and other podcasts to enrich your life or make you laugh. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next time. This is Ben.